remember being stabbed in the eye.
Salman Rushdie sits down with Anderson Cooper for his first television interview after he was almost killed by a knife-wielding attacker.
So my first thought when I saw this murderous shape rushing towards me was, so it's you.
Hello, I'm Nicole Killian in Washington, and welcome to America Decides. We're following breaking news out of New York, where the full jury and one alternate have been selected for former President Donald Trump's hush money trial. Two previously selected jurors were dismissed earlier today. One expressed doubt about her ability to be fair and impartial, and the other faced concerns about the accuracy of some of his responses. The former president was in the courtroom all day today, and so is our Robert Costa, who joins us now. Bob, now that the jury has been selected, what happens next?
We're looking at opening arguments potentially starting now in the coming days. Unlikely tomorrow, though possible, probably more like Monday. This jury is going to really be set and ready to go. This was a really chaotic day here at the courthouse. I'm just steps away from the courthouse, stepped away to have a conversation. And it stumbled backward and forward, Nicole. You had 12 jurors now at the end of the day, 7 men and 5 women. But this was a process that was chaotic because it started with 7 today, then went down to 5 after 2 were dismissed, now back up to 12 with the jury being seated. And it's a complicated process. Lawyers close to both the Trump legal team and the prosecution say this isn't surprising. But here we are. The judge, Juan Merchan, in this case, wants to move swiftly, and he's doing just that.
And what has the former president's demeanor been like in the courtroom?
The former president has been mostly muted today. He is expected to maybe make some comments after he leaves court in the coming hour. But he has been told by the judge to be quiet. He can't be muttering. He can't do anything that would in some way intimidate a witness or a potential witness.
Well, you talked about the significance of keeping quiet, yet prosecutors argue that Trump has violated his gag order multiple times. They're calling for him to be held in contempt. Is there anything else the judge can do at this point to stop the former president from speaking about this case?
At this point, there's going to be a hearing next week about the scope of Trump's gag order. We know that Trump is not allowed to talk about jurors in this case or post about them in any way. He's been told not to mutter about them in court, even the possible jurors. He is allowed to talk about the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, the main prosecutor in this case. He's also allowed to talk about the New York judge, Juan Merchan. You have Trump, though, continuing to rage about this case on social media, arguing that prosecutors are out of line, that this is not a crime in any way. And these statements are certainly on a political level, not a legal level, stoking the grievances of his supporters as he runs once again for the White House. And it's such an unusual moment right now in the presidential campaign. The Republican frontrunner, the candidate who's presumptively the nominee of one of the 2 major parties in this country, sitting in a courtroom about to face opening arguments as a jury comes together.
All right. Robert Costa following the latest developments for us out of Manhattan tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And of course, one of the other big political stories that we are following today was from the Biden campaign. Over a dozen members of independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s family endorsed President Biden in Philadelphia today. Biden is wrapping up a 3-day swing of the key battleground state. Our Weijia Jiang joins us now from the White House. And Weijia, what signal is the Biden campaign trying to send with these endorsements?
Well, Nicole, I think the very fact that they had this announcement during a huge campaign event in Philadelphia shows how seriously Democrats are taking RFK Jr.'s run. I think earlier on it was easier to dismiss him, but he has been gaining traction. And they're not so much worried, of course, that he will win the presidency. But when it comes down to it, you know, this race between Joe Biden and Donald Trump is going to be won in just a handful of swing states. And if RFK Jr. can make a difference in those states, it could be devastating for President Biden. And so they're signaling that they're taking this seriously. And I think also, what more can you say except your own family is deciding to vote against you? I think that message speaks for itself.
Yeah, and speaking of that, we did hear from several members of the Kennedy family today about their endorsement. Here's Carrie Kennedy, the sister of RFK Jr. Let's take a listen.
We want to make crystal clear our feeling that the best way forward for America is to re-elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to 4 more years. Nearly every single grandchild of Joe and Rose Kennedy supports Joe Biden. That's right. That's right. The Kennedy family endorses Joe Biden for president.
So let's talk about the timing here. Why are many of the Kennedys backing Biden now?
Well, I think they have backed him for quite some time, but this is the first public endorsement. In fact, here in March, the president hosted more than 24 Kennedy family members, so they have a close bond. The president today recalled that both Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and, of course, John F. Kennedy were inspiring to him, and how he keeps a bust of Robert F. Kennedy in his office. And so I think this is just, an important time, because they're really ramping up all their efforts to face off with Donald Trump. And it's interesting because Carrie Kennedy, during her remarks today and during several interviews today, she didn't really want to talk about her brother. In fact, in these remarks at the campaign event, she didn't even mention him by name, but she did insist that the race was only between Biden and Trump, that no one else could possibly win it. It's an awkward situation, but I think, they're trying to throw their support behind President Biden because, again, they are aware that there could be a spoiler vote because of their brother.
And given that, we also heard from another sibling of RFK Jr., Joe Kennedy, who told reporters that his brother should drop out. Let's listen to him as well.
Would you encourage your brother to drop out?
Of course.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Of course I would.
Appreciate it.
So to your point about RFK Jr. potentially being a spoiler, is this an attempt to pressure him?
Well, certainly, these are public remarks, and it's one thing to say them in public. You have to wonder the conversations that they are having in private, too. This is a political dynasty. This is a family that is very familiar with races and with politics in the U.S. And so, it's hard to imagine that they aren't having private conversations with RFK Jr. too, but it does send a signal to their relative if they're even willing to say it in public. And also during that interview, the former congressman stressed that we have to do everything we can to make sure not a single vote is taken away from Biden.
All right, Weijia Jiang at the White House, thank you so much. And now we want to take you. After we've learned that a jury has been seated in his hush money case.
But take a look at all of these are stories. You see them here. Greg's indictment even falls as an indictment. All of them. Greg crosses the Rubicon, indicting Trump on nonsense. The whopping outrage in Trump's indictment. It's a whopping outrage, and it is an outrage. Everybody's outraged by it. We had 18 DA or DA types or close. 18 or 19 or 21, if they counted all them in and out like. And in the meantime, you have murders going on right outside in New York. Look at this. National Review. Another National Review. Jonathan Turley, Greg Jarrett, Andrew McCarthy. Every one of them saying they call it a zombie case, meaning it is no case. And they say, is it constitutional? They don't think the case is. These are all stories that have taken place over the last few days. Take a look at this. D.A. Bragg wants us to believe that his pursuit of Trump isn't political. Of course it's political. And they're doing it for Biden. They're doing this for Joe Biden. Even the Rolling Stone, no friend of mine,
And again, you've been listening to former President Donald Trump in Manhattan at a courthouse there where, again, we have learned that a jury has now been seated in his hush money payments case. The former president there saying that everyone is outraged and claiming that there is no case to be tried here. But obviously, a judge in New York feels much differently than that, and we know that this case will move ahead. We want to turn on to another major story that we are following on Capitol Hill, where House Republican leadership has put forward billions of dollars in foreign aid for Ukraine, Israel, and allies in the Indo-Pacific. Speaker Johnson will likely need Democratic votes to get these bills over the finish line. Joining us now is New York Democratic Congressman Greg Meeks. He is the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. As we just mentioned, the Speaker has unveiled these 4 separate bills to deal with Israel, Ukraine, the Indo-Pacific, and other national security matters. Democrats insisted that the House should pass the Senate version of the bill that keeps all of these priorities together. Now it seems Democrats are willing to move forward with splitting them up. So what's changed here?
What we're looking to do in as a timely fashion as possible is to make sure that Ukraine, Israel, the Indo-Pacific, and humanitarian aid is out. Ukraine, for example, is in desperate need. It has no more ammunition. It cannot continue the war that it has been winning for the last 2 years because we were giving them what they needed. And so the best way to do that would be to pass the bipartisan Senate bill. 70 members of the Senate voted for it. If the Speaker would have just put it on the floor, I believe we would have 300 votes for it. It would go immediately to the president's desk. And so now we're playing these little games, I guess. And what Democrats have decided that it is so important for us to get it done that if they have to do it in these 4 trenches, but then put it together in one rule so that it goes over to the Senate and we can get something passed that way, we're willing to compromise and try to get that passed so that we can get it to the president's desk. And President Biden has said, if that occurs, he will sign the bill immediately. So nothing has changed with reference to what the content of it is. What has changed is the delay that has continued to happen with reference to the Republicans and their disorganization and them fighting among themselves. And so today, and even right now, we're still waiting for the Freedom Caucus and others to decide what they're going to do in regards to the rule and now some amendments that are being proposed.
And speaking of the rules, you were in the Rules Committee meeting earlier as they were trying to craft this rule that will guide action on these bills. At this point, do you have any updates on that? Where does this stand? And will you and other Democrats support the rule?
I haven't seen the final package yet, so we're still there. It has not been set yet. There's still negotiations taking place as we are talking right now. And so, I have to reserve any decision as to what will take place until we actually see the rule. I know Leader Jeffries is working very hard to see the rule and to make certain determinations, and I'm going to wait to see what he has to say about it also. But it's still not a finished product, Nicole. We're still waiting on the Republicans to come up with their final decisions. In the Rules Committee today, we saw Republicans going after Republicans and some saying that they would not vote for the rule. How many will not vote for the rule? All of those things are still up in the air. And we have to wait and see. And it just shows that they cannot run the government. That's the problem that we're having here.
Yeah, well, we know earlier that there was also some speculation that this rule could include a change to the motion to vacate, but the Speaker has now said that he won't change the rules. He said in a social media post that the motion to vacate from a single member has harmed the office and that he was encouraged to raise the threshold, but that any rule change requires a majority of the House, which we do not have. What is your reaction to that?
My reaction is the dysfunction of the Republican Party. Look, already, which is very rare ever in the history of the United States, we've had 2 speakers in one term, and now they're looking to do maybe a third. it's complete dysfunctioning of the Republican Party. And so, as you can see, anything that we've had to pass, keeping the government open, for example, it took Democrats to do that. And so we will continue to be the adults in the room. We will continue to look and listen and see what can be done so that our allies in Ukraine, Israel, the Indo-Pacific, humanitarian aid gets into those hands. But we've got to make sure that it is not held to the irresponsible actions of the Freedom Caucus or some Republicans. I still think that ultimately, what the speaker should do is put the bill on the floor, and there's a lot of Republicans, Nicole, who have told President Zelensky, for example, I was in the room with them, that they will make sure that they vote to get the things that the Ukrainians need. So then I would then call on them to sign the motion of discharge. 194 Democrats have already signed on, 1 Republican. We welcome 20 others to sign on. And there's been 20 that has said they see and know that the times has found us and we must get this aid to our allies. So I will be calling on all of them to sign the motion of discharge if their dysfunction continues so that we can do the right thing by our allies.
All right, Congressman Gregory Meeks, we want to thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Former President Donald Trump had another meeting with a foreign leader ahead of November. What Europe thinks about the possibility of a second Trump term. You are streaming America Decides.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
Does this carrier strike group stand ready?
It's just incredible to see there's an active search and rescue operation going on 12 hours after this accident.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Stories start with the who, what, when, and where. But it's why it's important to you that matters most. Knowing what to ask is how you open the door to a deeper understanding. See you on Prime Time, streaming free everywhere.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Welcome back to America Decides, turning now to the intersection of campaign politics and national security. Poland's President Duda became the latest world leader to meet with former President Trump in a 2.5-hour meeting last night. It was their first meeting since 2017 when Mr. Trump traveled to Poland and met with Duda in Warsaw. CBS News Face the Nation moderator and chief foreign affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan joins us now. And Margaret, you were actually on that 2017 trip. But in terms of the meeting last night, what came out of it?
Well, we know from the Polish President Duda's public statements that they did discuss the war in Ukraine. And in fact, according to President Duda, Mr. Trump asked his opinion, along with some specifics on NATO. And that's interesting because for all of the criticism of the Duda government in terms of human rights records, in terms of him running twice on an anti-gay platform, he is staunchly anti-Russia. So in terms of a persuasive voice on the Ukraine issue, he might be able to get through to Mr. Trump because President Duda, I was just looking back at my notes, it was back in 2019 that Trump and Duda had come to this agreement to rotate U.S. troops out of Germany and into Poland to be a buttress against Russia. They, in fact, said they were going to call it Fort Trump. That project never actually happened. There were some different disagreements over how to execute it. That renaming didn't happen, though U.S. troops do rotate in to Poland. But President Duda refers to those 4 years as significantly strengthening the Polish government and Polish security. So he has a very different view and characterization of what those 4 years of the Trump administration were about in terms of Ukraine and Russia. But when it comes to where we are now, the conservative politics of Duda are where the Biden administration has problems with him, that anti-gay agenda. They have largely put aside some of those public criticisms of him of late because he's on their side when it comes to standing up to Vladimir Putin and being pro-NATO.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a delicate balancing act there. But in terms of some of these foreign governments that are taking meetings with the former president, why are they doing this in the middle of a presidential campaign?
Well, it's hard here when we say, you know, there's only one president at a time and you don't want to complicate the politics within the parties. The counter to that, for example, from the government of the United Kingdom, a U.S. ally, was it is standard to meet with opposition leaders. And that is part of a democracy, and that is part of prudent planning. And David Cameron, the foreign secretary now, the former prime minister, went down to Mar-a-Lago and held this meeting with Mr. Trump. Part of that, the UK government would argue, was strategic to talk to him about issues like Ukraine, because Mr. Trump, even out of office, is hugely influential in the conservative movement. We see this in our own polling. In the CBS News poll, 79% of self-described Republicans cite Mr. Trump as the most trusted source of information on Russia and Ukraine, more than the Pentagon, Nicole.
I mean, why is that?
It is, we are now in, I mean, this is a whole other, we could talk for an hour about the weaponization of information, distrust in journalists like us, distrust in media institutions. The wearing away of trust in our institutions is broadly an issue, not just in our democracy, but in many places. But that's pretty incredible that he is that much of a thought leader. By the way, it would help out Speaker Mike Johnson quite a lot if Mr. Trump came out and endorsed that Ukraine aid bill, which he hasn't done. And that has complicated the politics of the party. But back to your question about the leaders and who's going for meetings, when it becomes an issue is when it is a country that is in opposition to U.S. priorities or U.S. values. And that is why with Viktor Orban, the prime minister of Hungary, we talked about it, because at the time that the administration is trying to get support for Ukraine going and get Congress on board, Viktor Orban was standing in the way in Europe of more aid to Ukraine. He was also and has been saying openly racist things. So that is why the Biden administration does not embrace him. For the possible next president to be doing so, a former president, really runs counter to U.S. interests, is what the Biden administration would argue.
And I guess more broadly speaking, how are global leaders watching this 2024 campaign?
Nicole, it's incredible the number of diplomats I talk to who are all gaming this out, particularly in Europe. It was a question until that bill that Senator Tim Kaine and Marco Rubio co-sponsored and got through that, or as an amendment to make it hard for a future president to withdraw or stand in the way of NATO. That was crafted with one man in mind, the potential president, Donald Trump, because of his criticism of NATO. So there is planning on national security matters taking place to hedge against some of these risks that these European leaders would say, in particular, are posed by the Trump administration. But whether it's Asia, whether it's the Middle East, there is an eye towards election year politics and how things might change. There's been speculation that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu might be trying to wait things out. He's politically embattled. And he was at one time close with Mr. Trump, though they've seemed to have some public spats as well. So the entire world is watching this election, and the world is literally, you know, on a knife's edge on so many different fronts and so many different wars.
Well, really fascinating discussion. Margaret Brennan, thank you so much for your reporting. And you can see Margaret on Face the Nation this coming Sunday right here on CBS News. Arizona Republicans blocked the latest effort to repeal the state's 1864 near-total ban on abortion, but some Republicans in the state Senate are now siding with Democrats. The details next. You're streaming America Decides.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
This is CBS.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Arizona Republicans blocked an effort to repeal the state's 1864 near-total ban on abortion for a second time on Wednesday. However, some Arizona Republicans in the state Senate sided with Democrats hours after the vote. That allows them to introduce a bill to repeal this measure, which could be voted on within the next few weeks. Our Shauna Mizell joins us now from Phoenix. And Shauna, why are Arizona Republicans suddenly split on the effort to repeal the abortion law?
Well, we know that abortion is a sensitive topic that garners mixed emotions across the spectrum from voters and politicians alike, and that's certainly the case here in Phoenix. You had the State House Speaker say yesterday that some people think that abortion is murder of an unborn child, and when that Arizona Supreme Court decision came down that said that 1800s abortion ban could be enacted, you also had some Republicans immediately condemning that decision, but all of those mixed emotions and feelings have converged here on Phoenix, and these Republican lawmakers have effectively stalled any progress on repealing that ban.
And so what's next for this abortion law, and how long do you see this playing out in Arizona?
Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs is a Democrat. She said that she will continue to push the legislature to make some progress on repealing this ban. In the Senate, they were able to get a procedural vote passed, and they got the first reading of one bill. But the question is, what would happen in the House if a repeal effort makes it there? And we also know that there are organizers that have been gathering signatures in hopes of putting a constitutional amendment on the ballot this November that would enshrine the right to an abortion in the state's constitution.
And CBS News polling shows abortion isn't one of the more important issues for GOP voters come November. So could situations like this potentially change that notion or those numbers?
Right. Our CBS News poll showed that abortion was at the bottom of the list when it comes to priorities for Republican voters, next to foreign policy, polling at about 10%. But what really is important is how independent voters will feel as it relates to the issue of abortion. We know that Biden and President Trump will be making a play for those independent voters, and Arizona is going to be a key battleground state in the November election.
It certainly will. Shauna Mizell in Phoenix. I'm sure you will be back many times. Thank you so much. And that does it for us today. Join us on Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern for a very special edition of America Decides. Starting next week, we will be permanently expanding to an hour-long show to bring you the latest CBS News reporting and analysis from Washington and from the campaign trail. You are streaming CBS News.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through